Hi guys, welcome back to Note to Self. I am Payton and I am sitting here with Gayane Aramyan. Is that how you say it?
Guy.
Yes. Okay, amazing. And Gayane is my first therapist I have ever had on Note to Self. We're just jumping in right now because I want y'all to know about her from the very top. Sometimes I get into like the intro and we're doing content corner, we're doing all these things and people are like, okay, but like, who are you talking to? Because I just get overwhelmed or like I get too excited. So can you give us a little bit of an intro to Gayane and what you do?
Sure. My name is Gayane and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I specialize in women's well-being, and since I became a mom 3 years ago, I am working with a lot of moms, preparing pregnant, expecting parents for the postpartum period. But overall, just women's well-being has always been something that I've been passionate about. And then also couples therapy. Very passionate about that.
Ooh, I love that.
I see clients from my office in Sherman Oaks, and then I also do virtual therapy across California, thanks to the pandemic.
Do you think that virtual therapy, is that like do you have more clients virtually right now?
You know, I never thought about virtual therapy before the pandemic.
Yeah, of course.
The face-to-face is just so different. But then because of the pandemic, obviously it forced us to do that. And it's connected me to people outside of LA. And it makes it easier, especially for moms who don't have time to go to the office. It makes it easier to connect that way too, but just opened me up to other clients outside of LA. And honestly, I have clients that I've never met in person, and the therapy sessions are just as powerful as it is in person. Yeah.
I feel like most of my friends who have therapists right now, because I'm kind of like in the middle, so I might need to talk to you later.
Yeah.
But they all do virtual because it's just easier.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just so easy.
Even my own therapy, I'm like, I'm at the office. I'll just schedule it when I'm at the office.
Yes. I love that you do your own therapy, and again we'll get into our main intro here, but I did listen to the Okay Sis episode you were on, just to like, one, I was trying to figure out how to pronounce your name, so I was like practicing, and then two, I just wanted to get to know a little bit more about you, and it was interesting because I think that was 2019.
That was a long time ago.
So it's like pre-pandemic situation, so obviously a lot has changed, which will be good, because I kind of, sometimes it's hard to listen to people on a podcast and be like, okay, wait, this is like how I would go with like that version of who you were. I'd probably ask very similar questions, but now I have more questions, obviously.
And I think I'm also a whole different person after becoming a mom too.
Oh, of course. So I saw that on your Instagram post listening to the episode, and then I saw that because in that episode y'all were talking a lot about couple stuff, which I do want to get into. Because I think that applies to everyone. But then I saw on Instagram that you're relatively new mom, and I saw like your little videos with your baby, and I realized that you have a full new perspective. I think that's what I was gleaning from your Instagram page.
And I don't want to make this a whole like mom, of course, but I do think there's so much when we talk about the topics we'll talk about today. There's so much there, and like you have to know yourself before even embarking that journey. Or even being in a relationship. Of course. So there's a lot there.
Last week's episode, I talked about becoming your own best friend, because I think for me, I'll be 30 in 3 months, 2.5 months. And in December.
I'm December.
Oh, really? What's
December 29.
I'm the 30th.
No way.
Yes. That's so
awesome.
Capricorns.
Yes.
One of my best friends is also the 29th.
Oh, cool.
So I get very much Capricorn energy from you. I love that.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm turning 30.
Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Turned 30 last year.
I'm so excited. I feel like I was more anxious about it when I turned 29, and then I was like, wait, what am I anxious about? Like, I'm genuinely not. And I've learned through my 20s that learning to enjoy your alone time, and not only enjoy it, but like get to know yourself genuinely in your alone time. One of the tools I brought up was therapy. Is so important for your 30s, and a lot of that is so you can prep for a relationship, motherhood, things like that, or just kind of like have a stable foundational surface so you don't go seeking company of people that you probably shouldn't be seeking because you're lonely.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I'm glad that you brought that up. I love when things just like align perfectly.
I know. And before becoming a mom, when I worked with a lot of women and a lot of young women, because I've always been like, I guess a modern therapist of like trying to attract the clientele that was like-minded in some way. And so I had a lot of young women in college or in relationships, and it's so consistent with everybody, and it's everyone who is struggling with emotions and feelings. We don't know what to do with them,
and we have a lot of them. And we have as human beings, but also as women who can be more sensitive to things, like, and not sensitive in terms of like emotionally sensitive. I just think I was just watching a TED talk about, it was a study done, and I wish I had a more specific, numerical thing to talk about, but it was basically saying how women are more susceptible to the environment around us, where we pick up frequency more easily. So we can be more sensitive to things because we're more aware, but also it helps with intuition and things like that, or what we call intuition, which is just awareness, I guess.
Yes.
Whole nother topic. But I love also that you're fostering, kind of a community of women. Yeah. That's very important to me, especially on this podcast. Because as Josh knows, before Josh is sitting back over there, and I'm always like, women are better, like yelling at this mic.
Well, my background is actually, I've worked for a therapist before I was in private practice, and I ran anger management groups. So I was around men all the time. And I was this like young therapist starting out.
That is so scary. It's terrifying.
It was overwhelming for sure, but it definitely taught me a lot. And it's interesting how it applies now in my work, because when I'm working with a woman, I'm now able to bring in that perspective as well. Okay. And then in couples therapy, it also gives me a perspective, but I'm still, very focused in women's well-being, because there's so much in that dynamic that isn't talked about.
Well, it's also unknown, I feel like, because there's so many things when you go back and what has been studied about health in general, mental health, physical health, things like that. It's usually based in studies around men. And then we kind of apply it to women, and sometimes it's not correct. So I do like that we're being focused on a little bit more. Everyone's like, oh wait, women are different sometimes. Yeah. But okay, before we get into everything, we usually do a little life update. I will tell the audience, I recorded last week's episode yesterday, because I'm going out of town this weekend. But I don't really have much of a life update for you guys. Besides today, I guess I got new curtains. I told them last week I was really struggling with my curtains.
Where did you get it from?
I just got them on Amazon.
I was gonna say, I got ones from Amazon that are like amazing.
Easy, simple. I don't want to spend that much money. I also put together my IKEA outdoor set. Nice. I had my coffee out there this morning. Aww. It was amazing. I mean, there are a lot of bugs. I literally was sitting there like trying to romanticize, but I'm like with my music, my little notebook, and my beautiful plated breakfast, and I'm just out there like swatting away. Like this will be the next thing I fix. We got the table, that's fixed. That's my life update for you guys. Anything new in your life? Anything interesting happened to you this week?
No, I've been in complete mom mode because my son was sick last week and we were home. And so this week is all about me going back to my routines and going back to just me time and doing something resetting. Like this.
Yeah. So this is, would you consider this more like me time?
Yes. Okay. Yes. My work gives me so much passion and excitement. Like my non-negotiables when my son is sick is I have to see my clients and I have to go to my nail appointment. Got it. Those are my non-negotiables. And my husband knows. He's like, okay, I'll stay back. You go do your thing. Yes. So yes, absolutely. My work, anything related to my work is me time. It gives me passion and I get so excited to do it. So you've
prioritized that for sure.
Yeah. I don't, I don't know how many times I've canceled unless I'm out of the country.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
How old is your son?
He's 3.
I feel like 3 is such a good age because you start to be like, they start to be kind of like a little person.
Oh my God.
Like they have their own little personality.
He looks at me and he goes, Mama, you're such a good mama.
Oh my God. That is so nice.
Yeah, I cried.
I don't think I ever said that to my mom one time.
I know. And I can't believe like he's 3 and now we get to hear his thoughts and the things he says. It's a wild ride. It's not easy. Oh my God. But the moments where they say things like that, I'm like,
that would be actually like that would make me cry. Yeah, that would make me cry. I mean, you know what? I have a small life update, and you might have watched this too. The Golden Bachelor.
Yeah,
have you watched it?
A little bit. I'm not that caught up.
Okay, I just watched. They have 2 episodes are out.
Okay,
I watched the first episode, and everyone's like, "It's really emotional. Like you're gonna cry," and I was like, "Well, I think I can laugh. Like I'll be fine." You know what I mean? I'm tough. Whatever.
I can do this.
I got in about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and I already was like tearing up.
Okay, I need to stick to it and watch it.
Is so sweet and like it's just so pure, and I'm like, this is what the kind of Bachelor that I want to watch. Like it still has the Bachelor elements, but it's just, I just get bored with the drama sometimes because it's just so cringy and scary. But this is so wholesome and sweet. Like whenever they send anyone home, I'm just like, I'm gonna actually die. I'm going to die. Like I'm gonna die right now. I was so sad yesterday it was sad and happy.
Yeah.
And I love that they're doing this. Like they're in their 60s or 70s, most of them. And they're like hot and like dating. And a lot of them have had, you know, spouses that have passed away, which is a whole nother thing, being like, oh my God, that could happen to people. And they are moving on and like trying to date again. And they are bonding over the fact that they still, like, no one will ever replace that first person. And like, it's just so layered.
Yeah.
And amazing. I'm just like, this is, with everything also happening in the world currently, watching something like that is just like, okay, humans can be good sometimes. They can be so sweet at times. And I'm sure when your son looks at you and is like, you're such a good mom, you're like, okay, literally there's a light here.
My whole world stops. And honestly, I think, you know, motherhood for me has been very challenging. It hasn't been easy, but I'm on this mission, and this is like, it comes full circle with my work and the things I do. But with raising him, I just want to change the narrative. Like, I want to break the generational cycle.
Yes.
You know, it's not just boys. Most of us grew up not being validated for feeling things because, and I'm not putting blame on our parents. They didn't know any better.
Well, they weren't validated.
They weren't validated.
And then they weren't validated. It's just like a whole, again, a generational cycle.
And I have some sort of hope. I don't know if I'm naive, but I have hope that this generation, like our kids, are going to be different. And I hear that from my clients. I hear that from moms around me that are talking to their kids about feelings.
Yes.
You know, and validating and saying, even my husband, like, he's not a therapist, you know, and I'll overhear him sometimes being like, oh, you're feeling scared? It's okay to feel scared. Oh my
gosh. Well, I guess it's just, we also just know so much more about the way children specifically, like the way children's brains work at different ages, and like what you should, quote, should or shouldn't say at this time, you know, from what we know about the brain. I think we just have much more information.
Exactly.
But I also do think more people are in therapy than ever because it's normalized, but also we're talking about the virtual therapy. It's so much more accessible than it ever has been.
Absolutely.
Ever. So I feel like this is at a time where, and it sucks because sometimes when we talk about it, I do feel like I'm being like, well, my parents' generation sucked, or like their parents' generation. And they do in some ways, but they were trying their best.
We're going to mess up too. Like I always say, and I mess up daily. And, you know, I think maybe my son will be in therapy talking about me and
something
how,
else,
you know, but maybe he'll be talking about me. And so there is no right way to do this, but I do believe and have hope that we have a lot more information now that we didn't back then.
Yeah.
And we're having conversations that we didn't have. Like normalizing feelings is just so, I don't know, it's so cool. And then I have my son telling me, I feel a little bit sad. And I'm like,
oh my God.
Like, it's so cool that you're talking about feeling sad.
You know what I was talking about last week, actually, that I discovered somewhat recently that has changed my mind or my life, is like that feelings wheel. Where it's like sad, mad, whatever. And then it has like the smaller ones that are like, you know, what it more specifically is. And it is so difficult as a grown adult woman who is pretty in tune with herself to figure out what I'm even feeling.
So I want to talk about that if that's okay with you.
We can do that.
I think it really starts so early on, right? And when I worked with anger management groups and I facilitated those groups, one of the most common things was like the question, what are you feeling right now, would take a whole group session for us to figure out what someone was feeling in the group.
Yes, of course.
And
I like how it's done collectively in this situation. Yeah, that's amazing.
And whenever then I saw, you know, clients in my private practice and it was women too. And I was like, okay, so this is not just men struggling with this. A lot of people don't know what they feel because we never talked about feelings. Yeah. You know, if you cried, most likely your parent told you to either get over it or to move on, or maybe like, it's going to be okay, even not in a bad way, right? Like,
yes, they tried their best.
Yes, they tried their best. And I don't want to take that away from them. But what they didn't know that we know now is it's okay to feel things. Yes. It's even okay to be angry. Like when we talked in anger management, I would always explain it's not the anger that's the issue. It's the aggression. It's the behavior that follows it.
Yeah, it's the action.
Yeah. And so, and what happens now and what I see in couples therapy and all across the board is adults now are suffering from not being able to identify their emotions. Therefore, they're not able to express themselves and they're having so much conflict in relationships.
Yes. And well, if you can't express yourself, you can't be understood. And then how do you reach a common ground?
And what's interesting is, especially in couples therapy, they're always expecting their partner to know what they feel.
Exactly.
And then when I turn the table, I'm like, so what is it that you feel? And they're like,
I have gone through this whole exact thing. I went through a breakup last year in December, and it was a pretty substantial one. We lived together and all that stuff. And I think our biggest thing that we went through was the communication of the feelings. But then when I thought about it, I was like, maybe it's just that, we didn't specifically know what we were feeling a lot of the times, and you can't express something you can't understand yourself, and then you can't be understood if you don't express it. So it's just a full feedback loop that can be very overwhelming. Because I think for me, also, I have really bad anxiety, for example. So I'll use myself as an example, as I do on this podcast a lot. When I feel things, I get an overwhelming rush of almost like adrenaline. And identifying that at first is always anxiety. It's the first feeling, right? And which I think is just fear most of the time, which is, I think most things boil down to fear.
A lot of insight.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. But I do understand that feeling of, and I think what we're going to talk about today is emotional flooding. Is that what you would call that? Almost like an adrenaline overwhelm?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what emotional flooding is. And it's this feeling of it's uncontrollable. So we all get emotionally reactive to situations, right? We react to situations when something triggering happens, but emotional flooding is when it feels so out of control. So we might physically feel things like our heart is racing. We might feel shortness of breath. We might get sweaty palms. And sometimes emotional flooding can lead to an anxiety attack. Yeah. Right? Whether with anxiety, it would be an anxiety attack. With anger, it would maybe turn into rage. A lot of times people feel all of these physical symptoms, and then they get the rushing thoughts and feelings. Yeah. And there's an explosion that happens. Okay. And so it can manifest differently depending on what you're feeling. For sadness, it might be like excessive crying and just uncontrollable is the best way I can describe that.
Do you think sometimes emotional flooding could even be, instead of like maybe the fight rage response, more of like a flight or like turning inward, like maybe a shutting down? Would that be considered flooding as well?
Yeah, it can be a complete shutdown, and you would want to isolate and not, like, you can't even talk about anything in that moment. Yeah. And I have to say, the emotional flooding happens usually when things aren't processed. It can be because there's been trauma in the past or history of that, but typically it's when there's something unprocessed, and it's like anxiety attacks too. If you're never dealing with your anxiety, eventually your body is going to find its way to express that. Yes.
I actually have so many people in my life that I know that go through a lot of like health things or like aesthetically, things are happening to them where they're gaining a lot more weight than normal, or they're maybe losing a lot more weight than normal. Their hair's falling out. They're getting acne, things like that. And when I look sometimes at that, I'm like, some of my friends that I know, especially living in a big city with in a job that's pretty competitive, they drive themselves insane. Yeah. And I think that I used to do that a little bit, and I watched other people do it, and I was like, if there's anything important, I have to take a day off or just like fucking relax. Yeah. Because I think they're so flooded and they move past things and do not process them because they're just on to the next. Again, I do think it's a big city thing. It's not.
It's just a big city. It's society. It's what the world we live in right now. The fact that like news and everything is on our phones. We can look up information in 2 seconds.
We have a lot of distraction.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. I really think, and when I talk about parenthood too, I'm like, modern day parenthood is like, I mean, I know our parents went through a lot, but I can't, the fact that we can just have this information in our hands and we're distracted, and there's maybe before they compared themselves to like, I don't know, 20 people around them that they live next to each other. But now we have the whole world to compare ourselves to, right? And whether that's parenting or career or relationships, there is so much out there. So it's so important for us to really learn these tools to know how to manage the anxious thoughts, the angry thoughts, what to do when we're triggered. And a lot of it is you can learn through therapy. And I of course, I'm very biased in that. Because it's so much deeper than just anxiety or anger. It's like, where did we start? When did we start feeling those things? What was the trigger point? When did it start? Who in the family was like this? There's so many questions. Like when I do therapy with a new client, the first few sessions, I always focus on their upbringing, their childhood, their family dynamics, relationships, because I truly believe that so much of the past impacts the present moment.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of unprocessed feelings that are showing up now and causing you to have this anxiety is stuff from the past.
Before we talk about processing, because I do want to speak on that, because it's definitely something that I need to learn more about, because I've been trying to do so myself, but it would be great, because I haven't been to a therapist in the last 7 months. I don't think. I kind of just like stopped and just, had a little purging period of my own.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like I listened to you talk about it in the OK Sis podcast. Sometimes it's hard to find a therapist that you really connect with.
Yeah.
It's like dating
Totally.
or like finding a friend. Like it's just like someone who understands you. But okay, so you started therapy. You started as a therapist. How long ago? How long have you been doing this?
So I've been in the field since I was 18.
Okay.
I started working for a therapist as an assistant as an 18-year-old. And then I became a certified anger management facilitator, because you don't need to have your master's for that. You can just get trained. And so I worked by her side as I went through college, as I got my master's degree. And then I ended up doing my licensing hours and all of that with her. And she's my mentor, Anita Vidian. She was on a Kardashians episode.
Okay,
one
cool.
time. Yeah, she's
her claim to fame.
She's truly the best.
Okay.
Like even before that, and so I learned a lot from her. And then I worked under her group practice, and then within a year I opened my own private practice. I still rent the room in her office, so I'm never too far from her.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, so I've been in the field since I was 18.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I think I read that you were inspired to go into this field because of your own relationship and watching relationships around you.
Yeah, my husband and I have been together since we were 16.
Okay.
So a very long time.
Such a long time.
Yeah.
It's a lot to work through.
Yeah, we did have a tiny break in between. But it really it's not easy to be with someone for that long of a time.
And that many also, like, not only that long, but life stages.
Life stages, yes.
That's a lot. Like the fact that when we talk about being different people, 3-4 years ago, totally different person. Yeah. But when you're 16 to now, that is insane.
I want to say it's almost like we've been in with 10 different people while we've been together.
Yeah.
Like it sounds strange, but
I think that's important to look at it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Like 10 different versions we've gone through, and it's not easy. And so I was always fascinated with relationships. And so when I took like my first psychology class, I was like, okay, this is something I'm really interested in. And of course I had no idea what it was all going to be about. And then, focusing on women's well-being and relationships, and now being really passionate about preparing expecting parents for postpartum, because that was a stage of my life. And like for the relationship too.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I truly think it puts you through the ringer. Like,
oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Tomorrow. And then I'm so surprised. Like, why aren't we in therapy way before becoming parents? Why aren't we learning these tools way before this chapter?
Yes. So learning yourself and understanding how to operate in situations that will be very stressful. My mom was 21 when she had me, and my dad was 25, and my dad was in the military. So it was kind of like and it was a bit of a surprise. I was. So they weren't necessarily, they were just very young. And even talking to them now, they're like, my little brother is 12 years younger than me. And they're like, it's just so different.
Yeah.
Like we would have done things so differently. Obviously you can't, you have to give yourself grace and all these things. But I really love how you're talking about how you kind of move through your field in a way that reflects your life.
Yeah. And
that's
my
really
clients did too, interestingly enough. I mean, of course I see clients, who aren't parents, who aren't even in relationships. But again, it's almost like I attract a similar, we're into similar things. And I love my clients.
Well, you can also be compassionate. And I heard this in your OK Sis interview that you did, saying that modern therapists sometimes, I guess therapists of the past were very prescriptive and very, like you were just talking to a wall, and like that's what it was. And you were saying you don't like get involved and you don't like make it about you, but you are able to use your own experience and kind of, relate on a certain level, which I think is so beautiful. Like
Thank
it just makes
you.
someone feel seen a little bit
Thank
more.
you.
And I think it makes therapy more comfortable if you're not just like talking to
Yeah.
like literally a brick wall.
Yeah. And, you know, there's been many times where I've shared something and I've had a client say like, I can't believe you go through that. Like,
yeah.
It's interesting because I think we hold our own therapist to like a higher standard. And then when you hear like, oh no, they mess up too. Like I'm human too.
Yes,
you know?
of course.
And I have my own therapist and I've been seeing her and she definitely impacts the way I do therapy. And you have to make sure to work through your own stuff before you show up in the room.
Yes, of
so
course.
when I was in postpartum, I took about 6 months off to study for my board exam. Crazy. No one do that ever. Like, looking back, I'm
what
like,
a time.
What was I thinking? And I remember thinking that I was going to go back in a month to work. And I remember thinking I'm not in an emotional, like,
headspace.
Yeah. I'm not in that place to go back and like hold space for someone else's feelings. And so I really had to honor that and work through my own stuff before showing up for my clients.
Yes.
And so I took, thankfully, you know, I was lucky to be able to do that. But I came back when I was ready to hold that space for them again.
You know what's interesting when you say this? It reminds me of, again, a thing of the past that I remember hearing with my mom a lot, or just like mothers of that time, for example. And this is just mostly like women, I would say. I think that people expect us and we expect ourselves to be unselfish. So sometimes if you're saying this, like I took my time to take care of myself so I could take care of other people better. I would think like the past generations would be like, well, you need to put yourself to the side so you can take care of other people. And I think that's one thing our generation has done incredibly well that I'm proud of us for is to look that in the face and be like, feel the guilt of maybe feeling like, is this selfish or not? And then being like, you know what? No, it's not.
Yeah.
Like I'm also I am the most important person in my life right now. So I need to figure that out.
Yeah.
But also you really do need to work on yourself before you can ever show up for anyone else, or else you're going to find yourself being like codependent in some way or trying to fix someone because you need to be, it's just a disaster.
Yeah.
It's a disaster.
I have so much to say about this. So I'm so glad you brought that up because I truly think as women, you know, whether it's in a relationship or just in your own life, if you don't have kids yet, especially in parenthood and motherhood, there's this idea that a woman is this self-sacrificing being. And that, you know, a woman who works and is a mom and she has to still do her housework, she has to still do all the things, pay attention to her husband, take care of herself, see her friends. I mean, when I tell you,
in the day.
it's
no way.
But it's impossible.
It's
right?
impossible.
And I think, but that's what we saw. That's what we saw growing up.
Or at least a facade of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I see now, and in my culture, I'm Armenian, and women are very giving. Like all the moms are, like they will slave away in the kitchen. Maybe not the right word to use.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
They will work really hard in the kitchen and provide for the whole family. And their hands will be like so tired and their body will be so tired, but they will still have a smile on their face. Now, as a therapist and as a mom, when I see them actually struggling. You know? Of course. I see them unhappy maybe in their marriages because they gave so much to their children. Like they really gave everything. I know my mom did. I'm an only child. Yeah. And she always tells me like, I gave everything for you and I appreciate it so much. But at the same time, I wish she took care of herself.
I have the same exact feelings. Yeah.
You know, and it made me, I think that also is a huge part of my life of self-care and paying attention to me and my relationship. Like I've always said, when I have a child, I have to make sure that it's my husband and I, and then our baby. Yes. And I'm not going to lie.
Which a thing of the past.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing. No. It was definitely like a woman saying that out loud. Yeah. I feel like it's very taboo. Totally. You know what I mean? Until now. Yeah. Because we know now like that is a important way to be for the sake of your child. Yes. You know what I mean?
And yourself and your own happiness. And I always say with kids, it's kind of sad, but one day they're going to move out. They're going to get married or go to college.
They want to have their own lives too.
And then you're going to be with your husband or your partner. And then what? Yeah. You better have a good relationship because you're going to be together then.
There's no more glue there. You know what I mean?
No. So and it's not easy. I'm not going to lie. Like it's really difficult to keep at it. But I don't know. I just think there's this pressure on women to do all the things.
Yeah. It's too much.
Yeah. And it's hard for you. And then I'm not going to lie also that I feel guilt sometimes too for taking care of myself. I'm like, oh, but should I not? Should I get that massage right now? We were on a family trip, like the three of us, for just a one night staycation. And I was like, I'm not going to get a massage. Like, it's about him. We're just here to have fun with him. Yeah. And I woke up and I remember, like, I think I need a massage. My husband's like, go get it. We'll be together. We'll play.
Your husband sounds like the freaking best. He's like, go do whatever you want all day. Yeah.
And I was like, in my head, I'm like, but this is the message that has been created by society, by things we saw growing up. In my head, the guilt is saying, no, you shouldn't.
Yeah, of course.
Stay back. I went and got the massage. It was amazing.
Okay. An act of rebellion. An act of for you.
Yeah. But it's like, but when my husband needs a haircut, you think he asks me? Or like, he's like, I got a haircut. See you later. Yeah. Bye.
So I love that you say this too, because especially when it comes to my own experience with my mom, she was really young when she had me and my dad was gone a lot. And that was hard for her, obviously. And she did have to pour a lot into us, and she stopped working. My brother's still at home. He's 18 now.
Yeah.
He'll be leaving this next year. So she's had children for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Because I'll be 30.
Yeah.
And she really gave up a lot of herself. And at some point, though, it becomes not good for the child sometimes. I think it becomes like, one, not only are you being modeled that you will have to do this one day as a woman, or my brother's being modeled, a woman's going to have to do this for you one day.
Yeah.
But also it will weigh on you as a mother, and you do start acting in ways that maybe you are not proud of, or you're overwhelmed, obviously. And then a child starts feeling almost, in my opinion, responsible for your happiness. And you're doing all of these things for the sake of your child. And then it just ends in, them feeling responsible for your happiness sometimes.
Absolutely.
And you're like, it's hard to have a right answer, obviously, because again, like we said, it's hard to go in and like not traumatize your kid. Yeah. And we're all going to do it in whatever way.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy to have learned that lesson. It sounds like you did too, where like you just got to go get the massage, and it's 50 minutes. Like you can still do all the things with your kid, but get the 50-minute massage.
Yeah,
it's fine.
And that's such a good point, because kids become responsible for their parents' feelings. They feel responsible. And then the other part is moms become resentful towards their partner.
Yeah.
Like there's this inner anger, just like it's there.
Yes.
No matter how much you're this amazing person who's giving your all and all of that. But like at the end of the day, you're exhausted. Right? Like
I don't even know. Like, so I live by myself right now and I work for myself. So I control my own time that I work. And there's lots of days where I feel like I give a lot emotionally to my job. I sit, especially on a mic, and talk about a lot of things that most people would not want to share with like even their closest friends. So it just takes an emotional toll. I will say at this point in my career, it doesn't take a ton of time if I don't want it to, you know? So even then, even with all of that, I have no children.
Yeah.
I find it hard to do my job and even clean my apartment and make myself food. Yeah. So I do not know how exhausted I would be if I had two kids. I followed this one girl on TikTok who her whole shtick is she makes lunches. She calls it like lunch in the trailer park for my three sons as a single mom.
Wow.
Okay. So she's making these like very unique and inexpensive, but kind of extravagant lunches. Yeah. And I'm just like, you could hear the kids in the background, and I am just in awe of people like that, because again, me just cooking for myself and then doing the dishes. Yeah. I'm like, oh my, I'm like already horizontal. I'm tired.
But that's the thing. It's like, I think just being in today's world is tiring. Exhausting.
Well, there's so much information and
too much information.
Too much stuff to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I just really think it's important for us to do our own work, get to know ourselves, get to know what our triggers are. That's one of the things that comes up in relationships. Like number one thing that comes up, yes, it's like couples come in to learn how to communicate, but it's because they don't know what their triggers are, and they don't know how to express it.
And then their emotions, they don't know what they're feeling. It's such a down. It's so simple, but it's just so difficult.
It's so hard.
I know logically, because I'm very good, as my therapist in the past would say, at like rationalizing things. I don't know the word they used exactly, but I basically tried to make logic of my own feelings, and they're like, well, you're not feeling them. You're not like you have an understanding of what's happening, but it's not changing the fact that you are feeling these things, and then you're reacting out of fear and anxiety, which is the basis of a lot of, reactions like that. Anger is everything's tied to fear, I've noticed in my life at least, which is why that connection with my nervous system is so important for me to learn how to just kind of calm everything down. Not even just in the moment, but overall, so I can prime myself for moments of stress, because I know they're coming in my life, But when it comes to, let's say, emotional processing, what does that even mean in your opinion?
Getting comfortable with discomfort is one of the most important things you can learn to do it when it comes to processing your feelings, because most of us weren't given the comfort to do that.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So, like right now, if my son is crying and I have the time and energy to do this, because not every time that happens, I'll let him feel it. So let's say I say something like, no more TV, it's time for dinner. And he's like, no, I want to watch TV. And I'm like, you can be upset, but the boundary is it's time for dinner and we're going to turn it off, let's say. Yeah. And letting him just feel the sadness of it. And when I first started parenting, that was so triggering for me, the crying. Yeah. And I think crying in general for all of us, it like takes our body into this like panic state.
Absolutely.
And so learning to let him be learn how to be comfortable with his discomfort, and then for myself learning to be comfortable in his discomfort in a strange way.
Of course. And
that applies to us, to anybody, right? Like when we feel something, it's okay to feel it. A lot of times in relationships, what will happen is, let's say you want to do something for yourself, you feel guilty, and your partner says, I don't know, let's say that spa situation. And my husband was like, oh, like, are you sure you want to go? But let's spend time together. Getting comfortable with discomfort would be, I know I really need this right now for myself. So he can feel whatever he's feeling. Yes. And I'm still going to go and do this.
It's the ultimate, you're not responsible for their emotions.
Yes. Okay. And I think that's huge. Like the second, and when it comes to your own parents too, the second you realize we are not responsible for someone else's feelings, you create that distance and you don't personalize it. Yes. Because then what happens if I don't do the thing for myself? I become maybe resentful. Maybe I have an attitude for the rest of the day, and then we end up having a big fight.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense.
Right? And most of the time, if it's a healthy relationship, that partner will feel what they're feeling. If they have a huge issue about it, they'll talk to you about it. Yes. But let that person deal with their own stuff. And then we have to deal with our own stuff. Yes. So how do we process emotions? So I would say first, you need to figure out what your triggers are. And I mean, like, sit down with a pen and paper and say, what gets me upset? What are the things that like really make my body go into this emotional flooding state? Yes. Okay. And write it down. And so we all have different triggers, and triggers are unresolved events from the past. So let's say, I don't know, this camera, okay? For me, might be this huge trigger because, I don't know, something from the past. And for you, it might be like nothing at all. You know, maybe my friend and I fought over this camera. I don't know, something, right? Yeah. So even though it's not the camera that's the issue, it's how we perceive it. This was the first thing I saw. It's how we perceive it. It's what our experience is with it. And so a lot of times people think that we have this thing to blame on, but it's how we're viewing the situation. So first get to know what those triggers even are. Which is
really difficult. Yeah. Because that can be really, for me, I know that sometimes when it comes to my own triggers, which I won't get into the actual triggers, but learning the triggers feels like weakness. You know what I mean? So then I'm like, oh, that's where I'm weak. And then you're like, that's not a trigger for me. Like,
can you tell me more about that?
Okay, let's say there aren't any that I can think of that I would like say on, because I'm still working through some of them.
But what makes you feel weak?
It's almost like, okay, there's this trigger. Maybe let's say I had a trigger around my hair. What if that was it? So like, what if I grew up with, my hair was, some people, I don't know.
That's a good example. Yeah,
I'm trying to think of like what would be embarrassing about hair.
If they made fun of.
Like, what if I had super curly hair that I was embarrassed by because people called me frizzy or something like that. Which now I wish I had curly hair. This is something I wish I had now. But what if that's a trigger for me, and then for me to talk about my hair, it makes me feel guilty because then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so surface level, and then you start feeling like, okay, well, that's shameful of you to be triggered of something that doesn't really matter, like your hair. So then you start misjudging yourself, and then you block it away. So you don't think, okay, the trigger is my hair, but but you almost hide the trigger for yourself because you're embarrassed about your own trigger.
So
that happens to me.
It's the feeling that matters.
Okay. Got
it's not necessarily what it is. Like I said, it could be this camera.
Yeah.
But it's your experience and your feelings that you felt during that time. So like maybe you felt bullied.
Yeah.
Maybe you felt really alone and afraid. You know, maybe you had anxiety form around that time.
So that's the part that I'm like, I get confused by, because it's, again, the feeling part that you have to identify.
Yeah.
So we're back to the feelings wheel. I'm like, what did I feel? So really, when you go to identify your triggers, because I've done this recently, I actually talked about this in the last episode with journaling and stuff like that. Sitting down to do that, I just wanted to note for anyone who might do that, for me was really hard. Not necessarily emotionally, but trying to peel back enough to understand what I was feeling, what even triggered me and what the trigger was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's when, of course, like, I think therapy would help you
would be good.
Get to the bottom. If you sit down to do this and you're struggling, this is where a therapist can really help you get to the bottom of it.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Otherwise, you know, if you sit down and things come up, you know, you can get to the bottom of it. But a lot of times people struggle because there's layers and layers,
of course,
of maybe defense mechanisms. Maybe you're not allowing yourself to go there, right? And so therapists would crack it open.
Help it. Yeah. That would be awesome.
You know, and it's hard, and it takes time. Sometimes I'll have clients literally look at a list of feelings to identify. And a lot of times it's masked by, let's say, anger. It's masked by other things that, you know, in session I'll have them work through. Meaning anger typically is a secondary emotion. It's like a surface level feeling. We usually feel something a little bit more vulnerable inside. Underneath it. And so we cover it up with the anger because it's easier. It's easier to be pissed off than to say I feel alone or I feel unloved. And so getting to the bottom of that, especially in couples therapy, it's like a game changer.
Oh, of course.
When you have a partner that says, I can't stand you, you never listen to me, versus I feel so unheard when I try to reach out to you.
Yes.
It's like
so night and day.
Yeah.
Different. It's so different to receive.
Yes.
I think one thing too about my experience with this, which I think a lot of people could probably relate, is I honestly and luckily don't have that much big T trauma in my life. You know what I mean? Very obvious moments where you're like, okay, that's something that's definitely going to trigger me. You know what I mean? Being a woman, well, I think we all have a little bit of big T trauma just by living, but little T trauma is the thing that is it's harder to uncover, in my opinion, and to figure out why you're acting this way. Because you look back on I look at my childhood and I'm like, I was always provided for what I needed. You know, you go to those initial physical things that you had. Yeah. Both parents were in the home, and you kind of overlook a lot of things, which is, I would assume, little T trauma. Yeah. And it's hard to identify those things, in my opinion. So I think that's why therapy is helpful for that, because you do get to talk through things and figure out those little T traumas, which will help with the trigger.
And that's why, for me, I like to spend the time on talking about childhood, because sometimes, you know, clients will be like, I don't really have any traumas or anything that happened. And then as we talk about it, maybe we learn the dynamics in the family. Maybe we learn about the messages that were spoken at home. Yes. Or a friendship that had an impact that you didn't think it did. So there's a lot of different factors. Yes. It's not just, you know, big traumas that happen and impact us, but it could be little things that happen.
That build up over time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're identifying the triggers. Yeah. That's kind of the first step.
Identify triggers, figure out what your feelings are. And, you know, I like to give my clients prompts for journaling, because journaling is powerful, yes, but it's how it's done. Yes. So if I'm writing for like 10 minutes and I'm writing how pissed off I am, and how angry I am, sure, that's a release, but it's not getting my logical part of the brain to turn on. So typically what happens when we're triggered by something is our emotional part of the brain gets activated, our logic turns off. That's why we might say things we might not mean, we might do things we might not mean. And so one of the things that's important to do in moments like that when you're triggered is pausing. And our brain doesn't know how to do that because it's designed to fight, flight, or freeze, right? And it's designed to protect. And so we now need to kind of rewire the brain and teach it how to pause before reacting.
Yes.
And that takes practice, because for all of our lives, we know how to do that.
Also before us, forever and ever, just to survive on the earth. It was quick reactions.
It was quick reactions, and we don't have that same danger yet.
Exactly,
and so we need to teach the brain to react differently. And so I would say, if you're in a relationship, to have a plan in place when things get really triggering, the person who needs the space to say something like, this is before the fight, like when things are calm, you have a plan. When we argue, if things get escalated, I'm going to ask for a timeout, and I will be back in 15 minutes, whether it's an hour, you decide the time, and we will continue the conversation when I'm calm.
Okay.
And that lets the other person know that you're not just abandoning the conversation and you're going to come back. Because the emotions are so high, whatever you're going to talk about in that moment, if you don't take the time to figure out what you're even feeling, it's not going to be productive.
Yes.
And so when you walk away, I recommend that you pull out your phone. If you have a pen and paper, you sit down with your feelings. You sit with it. You don't go on Instagram and distract yourself. Okay. You don't journal and write how pissed off you are. You process.
Okay.
So you ask things like, what's my trigger in this situation? What got me upset? Okay. Maybe he invalidated my feelings. Okay. Why is that such a trigger for me? Well, growing up, nobody ever heard me when I talked at home. And so I know that's coming from the past, let's say. Okay. What is it that I need from him? I need him to listen to me and maybe put away his phone when he's talking to me, because that makes me feel unheard. Okay, so now we know what you feel, what your trigger is, what you need from your person, because oftentimes we don't even, when we're in the moment, you don't even know what you need. Yeah. And what's an alternative way to handle this, or what's a different way to look at it? So then you realize the issue is really about me. This is my trigger from the past because I felt invalidated at home.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with him.
If you're in a healthy relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
Mostly healthy.
Yes, that matters.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you say, you know what? I think I got triggered by this because this is something that it's my stuff that's coming up. So next time, now that you know my trigger, do you think that maybe we can put the phone aside and have a one-on-one conversation so I feel heard?
Yes.
This is an ideal situation.
Yeah, of course.
But I want to say, through enough practice, you can have a lot more moments like that.
It's a great framework, because that's one thing I think when it comes to this topic, like we're talking about the processing of emotions, I've heard that term forever. And when I actually sit down to think, I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, how do I do it? So I'm glad that you gave some tangible tips, because that's really helpful for myself, even especially the journaling part. Or for me, I like journaling because I like physically writing it, but it is therapeutic in a sense. Again, not maybe the expression of anger, but getting down to the bottom of it and just having a moment with yourself to understand what's going on.
And it's a release, and what it's doing to the brain, it's turning the logical part on.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard anger tips of count to 10 or take a deep breath. That's all done to get the logical part turned on. Okay. So the goal in those moments is to get the logic turned on, so you're not just emotionally triggered, but you're thinking through what happened. Yeah.
That's what I do for anxiety. It's like the 5 things I can see. That whole thing, like 2 things you could touch, like whatever it is.
And that grounds you. So those things don't necessarily, here's the thing, I call them kind of Band-Aid because they ground you. They take you out of that headspace, but now you got to think of what happened that got me anxious.
Yes. And I think that's the thing with the whole nervous system regulation that I've learned a lot, not even only in relationships, but ever. It puts you in a fight or flight, situation. And it's so hard to live in that world, in that realm for too long. Because not only is it unhealthy, but also like you're going to make decisions that just aren't who you want to be, whether it's yourself in life or in a relationship or as a mother or whatever it is. Yeah. So is this something that you do yourself? Do you do this maybe this tactic for processing?
Yeah. I mean, I have an anxious brain myself, and, of course, through therapy and my work and being in the field, I've made so much progress to where I used to be and how I react to things. But then again, I'm still human. And when things get overwhelming, I definitely get anxious and the same feelings. And, I'm learning more to the processing part, I feel like I've gotten better at, but to really sit with the feeling. And I challenge my clients to do that all the time, but to really sit with the discomfort. Like I say it, I preach it, but it's also me learning to do with that, whether it's the discomfort of my child tantruming and learning to validate his emotions, whether it's my own stuff that comes up, and sitting with it means literally just sitting with it.
Like actually sitting there.
Yeah,
with it.
like I'm feeling anxiety. I'm having all the anxious thoughts right now.
And maybe not judging yourself for it.
And just letting it be there. I kind of like to think of it as like a cloud that's passing by, instead of, we can't get rid of anxiety. Yeah. We can't get rid of anxious thoughts, especially if you have a brain that's designed like that. Yes. Everyone has anxiety, but we can't get rid of any feeling. And so think of these things as thoughts, like a anxious thought or a feeling, and it's a cloud. And whenever we're in it, it's in front of us, and it's literally clouding our vision. Yeah. And as we sit with it, maybe it floats, maybe it's around us, but it's not like blocking us from seeing what's in front of us.
And it isn't us.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a
separate.
part of us.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of work as well in my practice of doing parts work. I truly think that we over-identify with parts of us, you know, like, oh, I'm anxious and that's just who I am. Yeah. Or
we really start revalidating everything. Yeah.
And it's about knowing who your true self is and having these other parts, like my anxious part is a passenger on the bus. She's not the driver. And sometimes she might want to be the driver. But I'm not gonna
Sometimes I will say I've worked on that a lot lately, but I had my friend Anna Grace on, and she's very spiritual, does a lot of spiritual work. And she's talking about how it was hard for her to take that part away from her identity. Yeah. Because even when something's negative, sometimes when you identify with it for so long, it really does become a part of you. It's almost like a crutch.
It sounds strange, but there is no bad parts. They're there to protect us in some way. So it becomes a part of us because it's trying to protect us from maybe getting hurt.
And we over-identify with it sometimes. And we think it's us. Like we think that's who we are. Yeah. And sometimes it's easier to just be like, well, I'm just anxious. Yeah. That's just who I am. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's almost like the anger thing. It's just easier to feel the anger without being nuanced.
It's a lot of work.
Or giving yourself grace. Okay, so I was going to ask you, because you said something earlier, holding space. Because kind of right now we're talking about sitting with our own emotions, which is kind of holding space for ourselves. What about holding space for other people, especially in, you know, a relationship or in a family dynamic? How would you... This is something I haven't really struggled with it, but I've been trying to, I want to do a full episode on it. Yeah. Then I was like, do I need a full episode to do this? Really? I don't think so. What do you think holding space looks like for others? Because now we know how to do it for ourselves, sitting there with the emotions, letting ourselves feel it, maybe not judging ourselves for it, and then turning the logic side of our brain on and trying to not over-rationalize, but kind of get out of that, you know, and not identify with it too much. So, and what do you think that looks like, let's say in a relationship, to hold space for your partner?
I think it's important to ask if they need advice from you or if they just need you to listen. Okay. Interestingly enough, it's usually the men that are trying to fix. Yeah, of course. But regardless, I think sometimes, you know, we might want advice. We might just want someone to listen. And so the same applies when someone comes to you to release their feelings or to express their feelings and kind of like dump on you. It's important to ask, what is it that you need from me? Okay. Because we can't read each other's mind. That's like one of the things I want to say is like the biggest misconception. And my husband and I haven't known each other for a very long time. Yes. That idea of I can read your mind, no, that's not real.
Well, it's not real. One, and we talked about you're 10 different people. And like, you know, the time you've been together, like getting to know yourself is hard enough every single day because you're changing yourself. So having the responsibility of knowing someone else's thoughts and feelings is just not something that I want in this life.
No, and it's just about a simple question of what is it that you need from me right now? Do you want me to just listen to you and validate, or do you want me to come up with a solution? And I think that's such a game changer of a question because now your partner knows that you're tuned in, you're listening, and you're going to give what they actually want from you.
What's interesting about when you're talking about this is, so in my last relationship, we became the partnership because we were together for 2.5 years. We were living together at that point. But we went from being in this like romantic kind of thing into a very realistic relationship, which I thrive in. I like to be straightforward. I love romance, but like I like to be straightforward. You know what I mean? Like I want a partner.
Yeah.
I don't need to be in a love story, but it's really interesting. And I think it is a romantic in its own way, obviously. But it's interesting that when you think about how we portray love just in general, and society, things like that, it's never this realistic way. It's very like everything's beautiful unicorns and roses. I always try not to do that. Obviously, I didn't ever want to out my partner and like tell his deepest, darkest emotional secrets on the internet. So I always hoped that I never portrayed it was perfect, obviously. But even I'm thinking about movies specifically, you don't really see any of this almost like very unsexy business partner talk where you're like, how do you want me to handle this situation right now? Because it's not, you can be soft, of course, but it's not that like typical crazy love that you see so much.
And that subsides. Like it's not, when they say the honeymoon stage, that's not just the saying. Your brain is actually releasing chemicals like feel-good hormones in the beginning, and that's why everything is so exciting. And as things, you know, continue and develop, then things kind of calm down and you really get to know a different side of that person. And yes, it's important to keep the romance alive, but like, let's face it, it's really hard. Love is not easy.
Not at all.
It's a verb. It's like something you have to do. You have to put effort.
You choose.
Yeah. And it's really difficult. And I think that, you know, even in parenthood, I used to think before I was in this field that you're not supposed to fight in front of your kids. And now I know that it's okay if arguments happen, like, you know, raising your voice. Of course, nothing that's
inappropriate for children.
But it's about the repair that happens. Like kids need to see that arguments are normal. It happens to everybody, and that you repair after. Because most of us some people either saw nothing at all, like my parents, they say my parents never fought, or they saw something that was really traumatic, right? But no, there was not an in-between of like argument happens, repair happens, and the child gets to see what a relationship is like.
Yes, it's like an emotional cycle that you're watching. That's actually really interesting that you say that, because I have always thought for so long that maybe the not seeing the fighting, because again, I grew up, me and my ex-partner, who at this point we're getting back together. But I bring it up because we've been talking about this stuff a lot, but like we grew up in two completely separate, you know, it was two extremes. And I think now, because sometimes I think, oh, one's better than this, like seeing more emotion is better. And then not seeing any emotions actually better, because it's, you know, but it kind of skews both of us in a way that we don't, exactly like you're saying. I never even thought about, okay, the argument's fine. It's almost like the feeling is fine, but the repair is the important part to see. Yeah,
and even, you know, when couples come for a couples therapy, they'll be like, oh, we had a good week, we didn't fight. And I was like, no, that's not the point. It's okay that you guys fight. It's okay for it to happen, but I want to know, what was the repair like? Did you guys have a sit down? Did you validate each other's feelings, right? Or did you brush it under the rug, and then that's going to escalate and bring up more fights to happen?
So I think that's where the repair is really getting me, because even like, there's also the combo of like, you see the fight and then no repair and everything. Everyone's just like, okay, fine, it's over. Like the emotions are done now, so there's no more fighting anymore. It's like, well, what the fuck just happened?
The result of a family where there's no fights at all, what I see in clients is that results in anytime that person is in a relationship and slightly anything is not normal, they panic and they want to leave.
Because it's not a good relationship anymore in their eyes.
So it's really learning how to argue in a healthy way, because arguments, like I said, anger is a normal human emotion.
Especially if you're going to spend your whole life with someone and you're going to be like you have pretty much at this point, more of your life than not. And you've seen probably this person, he's seen you through lots of emotions, I'm sure. Things that are sad, things that are really piss you off. I think that's a great way to hold space, is what we're getting around to, is allowing that, and also allowing for each other to be upset with each other, and then learning the repair process. Okay, cool. I definitely, I need everything to be broken down. Like, I'm very logical. So again, I'm making the emotions logical. But I like that also you combine the emotion, feeling the emotion with the logical side of the brain.
Yeah, it's important to feel. It's important to sit with that discomfort and say, I'm really uncomfortable with this. Like, this does not feel good, but I'm just going to hold space for it because we were not given that opportunity. It's almost like you're reparenting yourself.
Yes. Which is a whole nother topic that I am so obsessed with. So I had to have you back on.
I'd love to.
Also, I want to note my ex and I not together right now.
Oh,
girly,
okay.
She's single. Okay, it's a process.
Yeah.
I actually want to do a whole episode. Should we actually successfully get back together about successfully getting back together with an ex and what that looks like? Because I don't think I'm not the person that's like, okay, all right, let's get back at it real quick. We need to figure out, the details.
I think so much growth can happen while you're apart. And if you choose to still go back to each other, I mean, we had a little break. It was like 8 months long.
Ours is 9.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, we were very young. It was early 20s.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But it gave so much perspective to both of us. I truly think, it was for the best because I got to know who I am without him. We got to know things that we didn't know about each other, like how to communicate better, what was important, what wasn't.
Well, also with space, you start understanding the things that you did that, I'm a big clean up my side of the street first kind of person, even at a time when my friends were like, we hate him, like all this stuff. He didn't really do anything like horrible at all.
Yeah.
But they were not, your friends are going to stick up for you no matter what.
Yeah.
But I'm very much like, I'm going to clean up my side of the street. And for the last 9 months, I've just been, it's empowered me. It's made me like excited to be alive again. I got to living just only for yourself after you live with someone for a while. It's just like, you think about them every day.
Yeah.
What you're going to eat today. You're worried about it. You know what I mean? And you do it naturally, even in a healthy way. It's impossible not to. But it's been essential for me. But it's been interesting to see. We talk about, you being a bunch of people with your husband since y'all have met. Even in that time period of 9 months, how much you can be version. Like, whoa, a lot has changed.
Yeah, and I really think it's about putting yourself first. And honestly, it's about the only person you can control is yourself.
Yes.
You can't control the person in front of you. So you can work on the things about you and what you can do differently. And if the relationship still doesn't work, then you know that you did your part.
Yeah. And communicate the boundaries and all that stuff. But that's another one. I need to you just need to be the therapist.
I'll be back.
And the note to self therapist for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You have really, I feel like we talk about trying to find your therapist. I feel like you, similarly to the people I like to follow on social media, the podcasts I like to listen to, the way you word things makes sense to me specifically. Like, just like when that aligns, it's really nice.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot from Note to Self listeners. I'll see we have a little Geneva app, or people will DM me and say like, okay, what you just said this week was quite literally exactly what I wanted or I needed to hear, I guess. And I'm going through this right now. So I just love that I feel very aligned. I feel like the audience is going to feel super aligned with you as well.
That's awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you on social media if they'd like to follow you?
At Therapy with Gayane. That's Gayane.
Okay.
And on my website, therapywithgayane.com.
Okay, cool. And we'll link everything in the show notes. You'll go find Gayane. And thank you so much for listening. Please give Note to Self 5 stars on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening. If you have time, leave a review, but it's really the rating. I love seeing like the number go up. I'm like, so exciting. And thank y'all for listening. I'll talk to y'all next week.